Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. This is The Amateur, where we're here just to talk life, hobbies, politics, ideologies, what have you. And on today's episode, we're going to be getting into mathematics and statistics. And I know some of y'all might be groaning because gross statistics is ugh. But I think the basic principle or understanding within this conversation, I think is really important as a framework, as a general framework, or as an additional tool for someone to use going forward. And so just again to preface, I am an amateur. I've had college level statistics. I'm not a teacher and instructor, so like take everything that I say with a grain of salt. And then also just to preface, I just wanted to note that statistics, even though it is a realm of mathematics and how I like to use mathematics to try to understand the world, as far as like 2 + 2 = 4, and that's like an objective truth, and that's an objective reality that people don't really get to debate. With statistics, you do have to be a little bit more careful with how they're used because the data are manipulated. Data is plural. Data are plural. Data is plural. The word data is plural. The more you know. But anyway, so the data are manipulated in statistical analysis, and so those numbers can be used to achieve certain means, whether it's true or not. And so I think Michael Knowles says there are lies, darn lies, and statistics and like things of that nature. So like statistics are good to a certain extent, but it also depends on just how the data is collected, how the data are collected, and just how the process is, if it's reliable, if it's valid, etc. So there's other things that go along with statistics. So just keep that in mind. But anyway, this video in particular, though, I want to talk about the type 1 and type 2 errors, just as it comes to hypothesis testing within statistics. And I'll probably just throw up a little quick blurb on the screen or picture, because this is a pretty common understanding in statistics. But essentially with type 1 and type 2 error, this is where we get the things that occur when incorrect decisions are made. And these are the things that you want to try to minimize as best as possible, while still understanding that it's not something that's going to be eliminated entirely. And so just to kind of explain it as best as I possibly can, at least in statistics, you'll have a hypothesis or something that you'll think will happen, and then there's the negation of it. And then you'll have your reality, your evidence that will come, and you test your evidence with your hypothesis. And if your the evidence is aligned with the hypothesis, you accept it, you've made a correct decision. If your evidence is not aligned with your hypothesis and you reject it, you've also made a correct decision. And then type 1 and type 2 errors come into play when your evidence and your hypotheses are misaligned, but you make a decision that doesn't correlate with what was being said. I know I'm saying a lot of words, but essentially a type 1 error is an error in which the hypothesis is true, and so what you think to be true is true, but the evidence shown makes you reject the true hypothesis, even though it's actually true. So that is an error because you've made a decision not in accordance with reality. So that's the type 1 error. And then the type 2 error is its converse, which is when you reject you accept the hypothesis even though the evidence shows that it is false. So it's different words. They call it false positives and false negatives, and it really depends on how you want to look at it. Some argue that type 1 errors are worse than type 2 errors, and again, it just kind of depends on how that all plays out. But just again, to put all my statistical words into a context or a framework of mind that kind of makes sense. So just kind of understanding, it's like we do this a lot. We look at this a lot in daily life, especially when it comes to like law and criminal activities. And you have something like with Jussie Smollett coming in and his criminal trial. So you have, and I guess I should also say that with the hypothesis testing, at least how it is currently structured, it works best against situations that are dichotomous or that are in a binary. It doesn't limit it to those particular fields alone, but it's definitely easier to comprehend when it is within those strictly dichotomous things. So you have true and false, you have correct versus incorrect, or accept or reject, like the two things that can't be compatible. There's no necessarily any gray area. It's pretty much just meant to be things that are black and white. Diametrically opposed foes.
Diametrically opposed foes.
That's Hamilton. Okay, but so that's how that works best. And so what we'll have here is we'll have, so taking our criminal case. So what'll happen is our hypotheses is pretty much what we think will happen, and the evidence is what actually happens. Or I guess you have, I don't know if I'm phrasing this right. So with hypothesis testing, with type 1, type 2 error, how I look at it is like there's true and false, there's right and wrong, those things that are posed, and those things influence how we behave and how we act, the things that we choose, and there's different consequences. So I think how I have it framed is that the hypotheses are the what you think will happen, versus what actually happens, which is the evidence. And then based off those two things, your diaphragm is what gives you the things that are your actions and the consequences to your decisions based off how the two align. So what you think happens and what actually happens, and pretty much what you want is for what actually happens to line up with what you think happens. Okay, so essentially what'll happen when we have this is that we'll have a person suspected of a crime, and in our law systems you are innocent until proven guilty. And so what'll be is the hypotheses are that he's either innocent, that's your null hypothesis, which you start off with, versus not innocent. It's not the same thing as guilty. And I know we kind of use them as being opposed, but I know there's some nuance there with just because you're not innocent, or just because you're innocent doesn't mean that you're not guilty. It's like really different things just based off what the evidence shows. Anyway, though, so you have innocent and you have not innocent, and based off what the evidence shows and proves from the trial case, the judge and the what do they call it, the jury, they will either accept the innocence or reject the innocence. And so what'll happen though is someone comes forward, say Jussie Smollett, and I don't know why I keep pronouncing his name like that, but just say any criminal comes forward, he comes to the stand, presents his information, and based off the data given, if he is actually an innocent person and the judge and jury accept that innocence, that is a correct alignment of reality and truth, and that man will go free for not doing anything wrong. Versus as well, another correct solution is when a man is, or I say man, I know woman, whatever, people, when a person comes to the stand and they're a criminal, and they are actually guilty, they did do something wrong that they were not supposed to do, and the evidence supports that, and the judge and jury also make, again, a correct decision of not innocent, that this person did commit said crime, and give them the correct punishment as needed, that is also a correct punishment. However, your type 1 and type 2 errors would then come into play when you do have someone who is innocent, but he is actually innocent, but based off whatever evidence was held, there was an incorrect decision made, and this person was found guilty or found not innocent, and now this innocent man has to go, pay for a crime that he did not commit. And this is where you see Believe All Women when you're talking about the Me Too movement, which there's many things to be said about that. It's not entirely wrong, but if you're going to talk about a criminal court case and believe all women, like, that's not how that ought to operate. And so when you say believe all women, pretty much what you're doing is eliminating the other error, which is if the person is actually guilty, of committing a crime, but is found innocent, and now you have this person who's committed a horrible act or whatever it is, and they're let off free without any sort of punishment or retribution for their actions. So what Believe All Women does wants to eliminate or pretty much bring that down to zero, but what it does is that it raises the error of the type 1 error, which is putting that innocent man in jail, just because you've had this premise that Believe All Women. And so that's kind of where those two things come into play. And then So again, like, this is really how I mean, it's not the best way, because I mean, there's so much gray area when it comes to life, but I think it's nice when things are black and white and you're able to try to separate those two things and just kind of be more cognizant and aware of the things that you do. And so, like, another example that I use, or like how I think of why the truth matters, and I think truth matters because lies also have an impact. The truth matters because when it's not true, there is also an impact. And so how I looked at this, I think, again, on the previous video when I was discussing atheists' take on why the truth matters. And the claim was the truth matters because it matters, which doesn't necessarily explain why it matters. Another topic, though, but pretty much one of the examples that the speaker used was the truth matters because if I'm crossing the street, I don't want to get hit by a bus, right? And so, and then, like, keeping that framework of what do you think will happen versus what actually happens, and making sure that those two things are in a line. So what it will look like is that you see like a hypothesis, you think a bus is coming versus the bus isn't coming, and what you actually do is that you either accept that or you reject that. And if you think a bus is coming and you see that a bus is coming and you don't want to get hit by the bus, you're going to stay put on the side of the road that you are, let the bus pass before crossing the street. As well as if you don't see a bus coming and you recognize that a bus isn't coming and you want to cross the street, you will then cross the street. And then your errors will come into play, where if you think, or if you don't think that a bus is coming, but a bus is actually coming. So a bus is actually coming. You reject the truth of a bus actually coming, and you decide to cross the street anyway. You're going to get hit by a bus, get severely injured, potentially die. Type 1 error, that's something that we really, really don't want. Versus a bus isn't coming. A bus isn't coming, but you think that it is. So you're accepting something that's false, as far as a bus isn't coming, but you think that it is. And so you don't want to get hit, so you don't cross the street, and you never cross the street because you don't want to get hit by the bus, but the bus isn't coming. So it's like, you see how it's kind of a lesser impact, as far as with you're in a perpetual state of, I'm just going to stay on this side, even though you could cross. It's something that you want to do. You want to cross the street, but you don't because you think that something's happening that's not. Versus when something is happening that isn't, and you get hit by the bus. It makes sense, right? This makes sense. And so, yeah, so, like, pretty much with everything, like, almost with everything, this is how I like to try as best as I can to simplify the problems and issues of my life, to be able to appropriately examine and making sure that you kind of understand all the different possibilities. And, like, even in this case, is like, even like with God, and, you know, for me, everything always comes back to God and Christ. And it's just like, so you have either God is real or God is not real, and you can either accept that's being a Christian, or not accept it. I mean, it's sort of being a Christian. There's a little bit more nuance to that, but either you accept that or you reject that. And so what will happen is, if you look at the diaphragm of this type 1, type 2 error, where if you're going to accept that God is real, if God is real and you accept that God is real in Christ and all the other things, then that's where you get Christianity. That's where you get your acceptance into heaven, to be with God, because you can only be with God if you are righteous. You can only gain righteousness through Christ. That is the gospel in a very small summary. So it's like nothing that any human can ever achieve on their own. So, like, I can't claim my own righteousness is always going to be Christ, Jesus' righteousness on my own. Versus God is real and you reject that, and you reject being with God. You don't want any part of that, and that's where you get hell. Versus God is not real, but I believe that God is real. Like, this is if I were putting myself into the atheist shoes, I suppose, and, like, nothing happens. Versus God isn't real and you don't believe that God is real, which would be a correct, technically correct understanding, but also nothing happens. So it's just kind of like weighing your costs. And I guess that speaks more as well into the errors in decision making, as well as cost benefit analysis when it comes to choices, and, like, making sure that you're appropriately putting weights to the consequences of decisions and actions. But that's a whole other topic. And I know this was a little bit dry as a video, but I just thought it was something, because I like really is applicable to a lot of things, like even with like behavior and making sure that you're responding appropriately. And that's kind of how, like, if you're gonna get offended by something, like making sure that it's actually something to be offended by, you know? Because like, I mean, like we see all the things and be like, that was something that was so disrespectful. You disrespected me when you said that I was articulate. It's just like, yeah, no, like, like, sure, if you want to look at it in a certain way, but also not really, because usually calling somebody articulate is just a compliment in general. It's a positive attribute to a person. It's not negatively speaking on anyone else. So it's just kind of understanding, like, either, again, I think for me, it's just a matter of, it's a reminder to make sure that you are appropriately aligning with what you think happened with what actually happened to make the appropriate response, and so that you're avoiding those errors as best as possible. And that's just kind of my take on that with the statistics and type 1 and type 2 errors. And hopefully that you liked that conversation. I know I tend to blabber, and I hope that made sense, because it is math and it is statistics, so there's that. But I'm just an amateur, so what the heck do I know? Hope you like that. Leave a comment. Make sure you like, comment, share, subscribe, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks for watching.